give an update on kind of where did we come from, where are we now, and then that's a great space to kind of introduce you to our organization, and then we'll go into a PowerPoint. I'll do some more information after that. So I'll let Tori do the honors and play.
The Matthews House started here in Nicole. The youth that aged and fostered here in Nicole. The resources and support you needed to get the stranger that next. That stranger, Jews, joined forces with Sarah Mitchell to found the Matthews House in order to recruit resources and support kids who didn't yet have the skills. And one of you came out of a kid coming from a family crisis is probably themselves. The whole family was all over. The youth might not even need case management. It's been said that the easiest way to stop something is to keep it out of the water for Christmas. So in 2012, the first class families could seek help for situations to get ahead of this housing. The Matthews House is great, but the Matthews House can't be this one. It takes the involvement of the larger community and the cycles of poverty. It requires the people who can see and respond not ignore it. So we partner with community organizations, government agencies, local businesses, private companies, the local school districts. The Matthews House strives to Matthews House is a partnership. But we thank the youth that some years of history. They started something truly special.
Thank you, Corey. As you guys watch that video, that kind of takes you on our journey of our organization. So to give a little context, I'm new at this clicker, believe it or not. I actually don't know that I've used a clicker very frequently, so don't mind me. As I do this, I can't see the image in the back. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Liz. This helps me. Our organization started in 2005, and what you saw was our founder, our previous executive director, meeting a young man who needed that additional support in our community in Old Town. And that was really the foundation of how we became the Matthews House. Jerry Schmitzenberg, husband were able to say, we have the means and the resources to pour into our community. And so they proceeded to purchase the house. So this was our very first house. We do not have that house any longer. The big greenhouse that you guys saw on the video is our house. But this was the first Matthews House. It's on Matthews Street. People ask us all the time, oh, you're named after the street. Notice that our name actually have two T's, and the street actually only has one T. We were not named after the street. We were actually named after Matthew 7:26 after the Bible. Many people don't know that. Our address for this location is Matthew 7:26. Actually, to just give you some context of how we got our name, Jerry one day just came in and felt really defeated and wasn't sure how she was going to proceed. She had never started a nonprofit and just wasn't sure what the need looked like and just felt like a fool. And so she really quoted that that verse and then realized the location and the address was 726 Matthew Street. And so that is how we have our name. Just to give you context. So earlier we were just working with youth who were really that smaller population of 16 to like 21. And we started out serving about 70 youth in that first 2005, 2006 time frame. And at that same time, we really started to work closely with the Department of Human Services. So working with families and youth who were engaged with the foster care system. And so in 2008, we were approached by the Department of Human Services to take over a program called CHAFE. It stands for a senator who believed in the late 1990s that youth who were aging out of the system needed additional independent living life skills. And so there was a law enacted, and it was called CHAFE. And independent living was introduced to every state as a requirement for children who were aging out of the foster care system. And so states receive the money, then they funnel it down to counties. Counties can make decisions about how they disperse that funds, right? Larimer County was more progressive than any of the other communities in that space and say, we know that youth do not like to go back to an institutional space when they're 18, 19, 20 years old. If they've been raised by the foster care system, they're definitely not wanting to go straight back to receive those additional supports. And so they looked at community partners. So we became actually the first nonprofit in the state of Colorado to take on that program. And to this day, there's only several other counties that even utilize that model as a resource for youth who are aging out of the system. And so that was really our foundation. I joined the organization in 2008. So next May, I celebrate 15 years with our organization. So when I started the organization, we had 7 employees. To give you context, we now have over 60 employees. So we've grown exponentially. I always tell people, no, I didn't think right out of college I was going to work for a nonprofit for almost a decade and a half. But sometimes you don't know what your journey is, right? And so in 2008, I joined the organization and started working with those youth who are aging out of the foster care system. And as we proceeded, we saw an ongoing need in our community. You can work with those youth, but those youth come with a family system. Many of those family systems may have barriers to their success that cause them not to be able to parent appropriately, or that they need additional support because they're experiencing homelessness or they're experiencing poverty, or they themselves were never taught how to be a parent. They were never parented themselves. And so it's hard to teach how to be a parent when you've never been taught yourself how to be a parent, or you were not taught, you as a child weren't parented appropriately. So then how do you model what you were taught? And so if you weren't modeled that behavior, it's really hard to then implement that. And so we really started to focus on at that point the importance as an organization to work with families on reunification. Foster care is a necessity. I will speak from my own personal experience. I am a foster parent, a foster to adopt parent myself. We adopted our foster daughter out of the foster care system in May. And so her birthday's today, actually. She just turned 19, so I have a 19-year-old. And so but I will tell everyone, every child deserves permanency and to have that support in their lives. And so for me, the reality of, and I'll just speak openly about Jasmine, that's my daughter, her family and her parents, her biological family, they are loving people. They love their children. They just didn't know how to parent a child, or all 3 of them that were in care. And they also had substance abuse issues and mental health support that they needed. And I believe wholeheartedly has resources and services that deploy to this family would I really have adopted a daughter, or would have systems changed and been able to provide those resources. And so as an organization in 2012, we entered into those spaces of conversation or in 2010, we really working with families, and still system involved. So working on treatment plans, saying, how can we step into the lives of those individuals who need additional support and provide, coaching, walking alongside them and teaching those skills that often we may have the opportunity to change a pathway for you. And then in 2012, there was even further conversation about the growth of community life centers. So there was a large group of community partners that came together from faith community to judicial to municipal to nonprofits who said we need to focus on preventative work in our community, that we really, really value. Why do children and families need to be able to have crisis to be able to access those resources? And so at that point, there was a large feasibility study. They went out to about 20 different people went out to the Midwest for what are called settlement homes. And settlement homes were designed to around community taking care of community and saying, what does your community need? And you know your community the best. And so really starting to say, how do we work within that space? They came back to Fort Collins and said, we want to do this. The first believer in that process was actually the Department of Human Services, so that child welfare system. They said, you know what, we want to work upstream. We don't want to keep placing children in care. The trauma and the trauma that children experience in care and when they're removed from their parents is significant. We want to be able to support those families early on. And so they came and they said, we will fund workers to do preventative work, which was innovative at that time. It was a step in that right direction of innovation in our community around prevention. And we also have partners that came on board that said, we would love to partner with you around being able to offer programming resources. And so I had the privilege of opening our first community life center as I was growing with our organization. And that was in partnership with our early learning center off of LaPorte. And then in 2015, we had the opportunity to work with Genesis Project to open our second community life center in partnership with them. In that community, as I've mentioned, the communities in which the life centers live are really rooted in how you serve that population that attends and works with those staff. That particular community backs into Parkland Mobile Home Park. And so that was a very high level child abuse and neglect concerned community. And so how do you bring in an organization and support to support in that space? In 2019, the school district was just did not have capacity any longer to house our organization. They needed to bring in early childhood. And so that's when I met Corey. We came knocking on Corey's door. Actually, it was the Bohemian Foundation that recommended our organization to talk with Corey and said, Corey is rooted and curious about serving broader with the congregation in our community and using your beautiful space to be a place of service. And so met with Corey and said, look, would you be open to this conversation? Can we make this happen? So we moved into your guys' house in 2019, the fall of 2019, and then all of us experienced COVID in 2020, and have continued to be able to partner with your organization to continue to have opportunity to serve youth and families. And so within those different spaces, we have our youth program that is our hallmark that I mentioned. And that program really works with youth in that coaching. We also do experiential education programming. So what you saw in the video is rock climbing. We also take kids backpacking, we do art classes, just a whole gamut. We do music. We have a significant amount of youth who have never been exposed or have been able to engage in the music institution because A, they don't have money, it's expensive, and B, they're transient so much that learning an instrument is not a viable option for them. And so being able to step into that space when you're in high school and you've never played an instrument, you're not going to be going to band class to learn how to play an instrument because you should have been learning that in middle school. And so being able to engage youth in that space is really important, and being able to have them share their stories. We also work within, within our community life centers, we provide parenting classes. So you guys saw some littles actually probably in this room or downstairs that is using your guys' space. So parenting classes, Parent Cafe is one of the models that I love more than anything. I was actually on maternity leave with my first child, my first birth child. And I wanted to come back to the training because I thought it was so fascinating. We as parents often, we don't like to be told what to do. I mean, we're stubborn. I think most parents are, we don't all elect to go to parenting classes. And so Parent Cafe is really around self-reflection and opportunity to work on how to strengthen your protective factors. What does that mean? How do you have concrete supports? So when things are really challenging for kiddos in your home, which we all have, how do you mitigate that risk? How do you call? Who do you call when you have concern about your child, or your child is just driving you nuts and you need that additional help? And so that is the space that your guys' organization has allowed us to host those classes. We also host community engagement opportunities for individuals. Often the participants that we interface with are not connected and need that fellowship. That's often not something that they have access to. It may be because they don't have healthy supports, and so being able to access those healthy supports are just not achievable because they don't know where to find them, or they just don't, they're not connected to a community. And so being able to provide that community is important. We also do a variety of after school programming that helps kiddos regain learning loss that they may have. Over COVID, we were introduced to working with Cooter School District more deeply. And so Cooter School District identified that they had kiddos who just couldn't learn at their home. We all know that some kiddos academically they couldn't, they may not have the resources to learn at home. And so they identified a population, and we said, you know, we as an organization feel that our strength is working with youth, young adults, and how can we support in that? And so that actually became a foundation of a relationship with Cooter School District that has flourished. And being able to support youth who are traditionally not the students who are attending every day, maybe struggling academically, need credit recovery, but we know that they have potential, right? We know that they have potential. We just need to figure out what are those barriers that we're seeing. And so we have been working with Cooter School District and Fort Collins School District, or not school district, sorry, Cooter High School and Fort Collins High School. We have multiple staff located daily in those locations. Both of those schools identify students who are academically behind and need additional credit, recovery, support. And so our first step is, let's not lose any credits that you're currently enrolled in, right? And then what are some barriers that you're having? And then how do we recover some of those credits? Because we want you to walk. And graduation rates for some of the youth who experience homelessness, free and reduced lunch, and those of color are significantly lower in your school district than their counterparts. And so working with that subpopulation to help elevate them and get them across stage. And so I had shared with Corey this summer, we were given an opportunity to work with students on credit recovery. And Poudre School District did not do any in-person summer school for students. And challenging to hear that because we obviously know that students don't thrive online, and we've just went through a whole pandemic, and now we're right back where we're at, right? And these are the kiddos who absolutely need it, and we're not able to support. So we said, well, what if we make a makeshift academic space? And we also know that a lot of our kids from the previous summer needed to work over the summer. They identified, we support our families over, in the summertime. We need to have income. Education is important, but also supporting our family system is equally important. And so we said, well, what if we paid kids to come to school over the summertime and do credit recovery? And we approached Bellini and said, would you guys be willing to provide us funding for stipends for students over the summer? They, obviously we're gonna have metrics, it's not just like a free for all. And they said, let's pilot it, let's see what happens. And the results of that were incredible. And so just to give you some context, we had 36 kiddos who were academically behind enroll in the program. And we said, okay, for every class that you passed, you get $600. So we did the math of figuring out, like, what did a part-time kind of job look like? What does this feel like? And they said, okay. And so we ended up having 38 kids enroll, but 36 who completed what they started. That was a 94% success. And that happened in your guys' building. Of kiddos coming on a daily basis because they knew that they had the support, right? We know if you provide that support, academic, relationship, trust, kids will come. We also provided a meal. We also had a couple kiddos or students, I shouldn't call them kiddos, but students that needed, they may have been caring for their siblings. And so we looked at, do we have other programming going on where their siblings could engage in that programming while they're getting their academic support? Because again, you have to serve the whole family. It just doesn't work to serve one. And so additionally, of those 36 kids or students who passed, they passed 52 of their 55 classes they enrolled. That's a 95% success. This is what's fun, is that of the grades they received, 85% of the grades were B's or higher. And we have, I'll share with Corey other metrics about the subject matters. They did math and science. These were their core subjects. This wasn't a skip meeting. This was like actual core courses that they had to take, just as their peers did in their traditional setting. And they were able to successfully complete. Looking at the average of the school district, the average of kids who enrolled to completion was a 64%. So if you can think, we were at a 94 and the district was at a 64%. That's a huge success. So your space day in and day out over the summer was used for these adolescents to come and have a safe haven, have food, do their academics, get the resources that they needed. So a big thank you to you all for continuing to share your space in that, just to give you kind of a heads up of some of those programs that we do in general. And I totally went off the PowerPoint, so I can continue to follow the PowerPoint for you all to give you a little more context to where we are. But in general, that's who we are as an organization, is that we have grown exponentially, looked at how do you go from serving a youth to then looking at how do you serve that youth and that family that might be in crisis, to really looking at how do you serve families who are in a preventative way. Prevention costs half the cost of intervention. So if you can employ and provide resources to youth and families in our community in that aspect, you're actually saving our community resources. And so over the life of our organization, you'll see we've served over 3,400 families with over 500 youth served. And then So this is a continuum of kind of what I've described of where we are, how we got to where we are. It needs a little updating to add a couple more pillars in that space. But as I mentioned, these are really our progression over the last couple years, decade and a half, of where we've come. To give context, like I said, when I joined in 08, we had 7 employees. I was one of 7. I never supervised 7. And we now have a staff of over 60. Our annual budget is $2.4 million. Next year it will be $2.6 million. That's a large nonprofit in our community. When you look at the cost of running an organization and moving forward, we with our site, so the greenhouse that y'all saw before, our community life center at Genesis Project and community life center with you all, we also have 9 satellite sites for homework helpers in partnership with Care Housing and also Loveland Housing Authority. So we also partner with other locations to say, how do you do site-based work, knowing that sometimes kiddos will be bused home. They don't have the access to just come to different locations. And so we go to them, which is easier. And then, I don't know, what's our class? So here's some, this is our continuum. So here's some continuum information about other programs that we provide and the resources that are part of the work that we do as an organization. As I mentioned, we do a lot of different experiential education opportunities for kids. What we've been able to do with Poudre School District is identify how do we become credit bearing, meaning how do kids get credit to do the programs that we offer, and that's been innovated to them around. So now children who engage in our rock climbing class, they get credit, they get school credit to do it. So that really, again, starts to mitigate them being like, I don't want to come to an after school program, or I don't want to do something like that. That's not, you have to see what benefits them and what they value, not what you or I may value. You and I might value a high school diploma. Some kiddos, that stipend that they got over the summer, that was really their motivation, but it's a success. And there's already conversation of how to extend that opportunity next year in the space. And then I'm not sure what our final. So these are our kind of areas of focus in our pillars. So when we're working with families on case management, we're really looking at housing, well-being, education, employment, and life skills. Really trying to be intentional that these are the areas that we as an organization feel really concrete are needed to be successful and move forward in being a thriving family or a thriving youth in our community. And I don't know. So this kind of talks about the music program. Again, I totally went off script. I don't know that I've done a presentation in a long time, so you guys are right. And so this talks about our program, our music program. So, this was done the fall of last year, I believe. So at that time, we had 287 individual music lessons that had been given for 40 different students. If any of you are talented musicians and want to teach let me know. We are always looking. We also believe in paying our music instructors. That's their profession. And so we have a system of being able to pay our musicians that come in and teach because it is a profession. And being mindful not to take, not everybody has the ability to volunteer, and that's okay. And then these are some volunteer opportunities that exist. In conversations with Corey earlier today, I would encourage if any of you are like, I would love to get involved. I don't know where my skills or my talents really are useful in an organization. I would encourage you to meet with our volunteer coordinator, Todd, and he would kind of look at the bigger picture. He knows our organization kind of plug you in where you need to be, and what's helpful. And sometimes people are like, I want to do one-time things. Others are like, I really want to work with people. Or others are like, I don't do the working with people thing. I can do things behind the scenes for you. We all have talents of some capacity. So I encourage you to be a part of that. And then what I will also share with you is it's still slightly quiet, but we will be the lead agency to open a youth shelter here in Larimer County. So Larimer County will be opening a youth shelter in 2024. It is not known yet fully in our community, so I'm giving you a little advanced knowledge. So in 2018, there was a large community of organizations that gathered that identified unaccompanied youth who, for whatever reason, were unsheltered in our community. And some of those children were youth that are young, still in the school academic spaces, and then kiddos who are up to 21, 22 years old who need that additional space and support. A traditional shelter is not ideal for them. They are not as trauma informed and aware of just developmentally where young adults are, versus a 50-year-old male who's experiencing homelessness. That's very different than an 18-year-old male who is, maybe still in high school and needing that support. At that time, we were not able to move forward with full understanding of what the organizations were there. We didn't have the brick and mortar. It's very hard, and as you all know in the community, I know my colleagues at the other nonprofits from Homeowner Alliance and others have come and spoken to you that brick and mortar are hard to come by, and you need shelter for adults and youth in that space. And so then COVID hit, and so the work that was being done went kind of. And then in the spring of this year, it's been rapid. The spring of this year, Hooters or Thompson School District came to the table and said, you know what, we have buildings that could be used as a shelter. Why can't we just use our own school building? And we were like, interesting. And I had the opportunity to look at 3 different buildings, and I located one of those buildings, and I fell in love with this building. And I said, this is what it is. Like, this is the building. It's 6,000 square feet. It's an early childhood building currently, but it was already slated to be in a transition space next spring. And they said, okay, if this is what the building could look like, would there be an operating agent in our community that could help with that? And I said, let me take it back to my board. Adding a $1.5 million line item to my budget is not something I can just do myself. And so I had to go back to my board and say, I believe strongly as an organization, our foundation was to serve youth in transition in general. We've grown to be inclusive of other populations. But as I sit in meetings, I've identified a barrier, and that is that our community does not actually have a provider other than ourselves that provide any housing support to youth transition. And I kind of said, we're being selfish, to be honest with you. I said, we're being selfish to not identify how to move forward and support this process, knowing it was a big process. It's a big project. And so we said, as long as we come up with that feasibility and the financial and the strategic planning of it, we can be a lead organization to operate this, but it will be a community. It will be a community shelter. It is not the Matthews House, and I made it clear to my board, we will not be putting our name on this shelter, that we as a community will own this shelter, and that this is an opportunity for Hooters School District and Thompson to work collectively. It just happens that Thompson has that building that's available for us to house youth out of. If Hooter had it, Hooter would be right there too. And so this is a regional shelter. It will come, as I mentioned, in 2024 is our goal. Next week, we will go to resolution with Larimer County for a grant at $1.5 million that the county will be offering to support this shelter. Additionally, we will be remodeling the building to bring in trauma-informed work. Traditionally, it will serve about 20 youth every night in sheltering. It will also have a drop-in center. And so it will be the first regional shelter in this northern Colorado area. Currently, if youth are experiencing homelessness, they must go to Boulder or Denver to access those housing supports. And so we're super excited. Big project, big opportunity in the future for you guys as you guys work in that space or identify a population that you may want to volunteer to support. We have a large group of individuals who are interested in how we will make that happen. The truth is sometimes you just have to say yes. I don't actually know how everything will fall, but you have to say yes. And I'm grateful for my board to say, okay, Nicole, we'll help you with this project. So that's the big fun fact that we're entering into, but gave you all a lot of information. What are your guys' thoughts or questions you have?
Be the process for an individual who's coming out of foster care to know about a shelter?
So that's a great question. So the question was, how do kiddos identify or know about this shelter? So in the future, how will community be able to access, know that that's available? So one of our youth aging out of the system, I often will tell people, our community actually has some pretty robust systems in place for kids who are aging out of the system. We have some housing vouchers for youth that can actually transition them straight into housing. So Section 8 vouchers, which is like a subsidy that helps you find your apartment. There are specialized vouchers that are targeted towards just youth who are aging out of the foster care system, which is really different than say 10 years ago when it's really been a progression of resources poured into that population of youth who are aging out of the system. What happens though is they receive those, right? An 18-year-old, I think of my lovely 19-year-old who's still living in my home and going to college, who doesn't know how to put dishes in the dishwasher. And I think about that and I think, oh my gosh, I can't imagine her living in an apartment by herself and knowing those independent living skills, right? And so what happens is then those kids turn over, right? They don't know how to do those independent living things. So we have those vouchers and then we don't always have the ability to maintain them in that. And so then they need access to a shelter to then be able to be given more progressive support in finding and maintaining housing, but case management wrap around with it. And so we work really closely with our Department of Human Services. So they're actually part of our core group of the shelter in general, and saying, we need you to be at this table too. You are part of this equation for the shelter. And so they will be a point of contact for that. Our community partners will be a point, the school district will be there. Both school districts are 100% partnering on this, which, as many of you I assume have lived in our communities for an extended period of time, Thompson and Cooter haven't always been communicative and supportive of each other. And so this is a universal approach. When you have both superintendents sitting in core meetings and saying, this is an issue for our youth in our community, and we need to take a different approach than we as a community have done in the past. It's pretty unique experience, I'll be honest. Sometimes I'm like, wow, how did you all come together? And how did we do this in the last 4.5 months? We like to move fast in that process. Other questions? Yes.
Are they required to have a job? How do they do?
So the question is, for a young adult who receives a voucher or Section 8 housing, do they have to have employment to be able to support the housing? And the answer is no, they do not. And so With a Section 8 voucher, you pay 30% of your income, and your income can be zero. And how that works is that it's housing first model around ensuring individuals are housed, and then this sounds horrible. So a kiddo who doesn't have a job, they're deemed unstable in the kind of voucher system, meaning every 3 months they have to recertify, so that if they do get a job, they now have to pay 30% of their income. So it's not as if like they get a voucher, you don't have a job, and you now never have to pay rent or any portion of your voucher. Until you start to pay a portion of your voucher, you're unstable and you have to recertify every 3 months to be able to maintain that voucher. Is it easy to not have a job and have an apartment? Absolutely not. You have to still pay your utilities. You have to pay for food, and there are those community resources, right? Like the food bank or other resources that individuals can access that can offset that cost of housing. But it's not ideal for us to place kiddos in apartments when they have no job. And so that's why wraparound case management support is vital to being able to help them move forward in their spaces. And we would be looking at kiddos in advance to that. We rarely do we place a kiddo in an apartment to just put them in an apartment and watch them flounder. It's not our goal. And so it's how do we employ them? How do we give them those resources? And then, I mean, our services can go up until they're 20 years old. So that's, you know, that's not even, some kiddos need support until they're 26, right? So we know that, and so we're aware the system is not, system's still broken. We're very aware of that. Yeah.
How easy is it for them to find housing, or for you to find housing in Fort Collins?
So the question is, how easy is it in an individual able to find affordable housing in our community using a voucher? It's really hard. It's nearly impossible, and there has to be those, you know, a housing navigator essentially. It's not as easy. I remember when I think back to the work I had the opportunity to do direct line work, and I would have a kiddo 12 years ago who had a voucher. It was way easier to go out into our community and identify and call and say, okay, do they meet the threshold of the maximum amount that this voucher will allow? There are limitations. It's not just, oh, you get a voucher and you can get a, you know, a $20,000 a month apartment. There are levels of what you have to be kind of looking for, and are those available? No, they're not. And it's, I was meeting with the Loveland Housing Authority and executive director last week, and we were talking because we have vouchers for youth for aging out foster care. We actually also have a set of vouchers that support youth who may have mental health concerns, and so we also have those vouchers that can help individuals who don't have the qualifier of foster care. And so as I was talking to him, he's like, oh gosh, Nicole, he's like, what has happened is in our community for a really extended period of time, our housing authorities built apartment complex with 2 bedrooms, very limited 1 bedroom. And if they did build them for 1 bedroom, they were traditionally for senior living. They weren't for individuals, young adults. And so what's happened is that we get these vouchers for a single young adult, and there's not even 1 bedroom apartments available. The number of apartments that even meet that need is really low in our community. And so they're working on their end in Loveland to build out one of their subdivisions to almost be 1 bedroom studio apartments. And so that's one of those, like, are we ever going to catch up? right? We know if we're going to. And then you add to that equation the lack of inventory because they just aren't available. Not so much, are they, we just don't have apartments. They're not there, and so studios aren't either. So, yeah.
Is that prohibited? That cannot be kosher?
With the voucher. So the question is, are there innovative ways to utilize a voucher to house an individual? So at college, sometimes you may have 4 people to one, or, one housing space. There are and there aren't. Some of the vouchers you can go. So if you have a 1-bedroom voucher, you can do a studio. You can rent a studio with a 1-bedroom voucher. And so there's no regulations around that room size, what that looks like, how much privacy you have. There are other conversations around, there was an interesting, there's a brand new, so a real estate, apartment real estate company actually contacted Housing Catalyst recently around some opportunities like that, where they, I think, initially thought that they would support one population and they're looking at a different population. And so could we use our vouchers in those spaces? So being innovative in that, it's like, there's not a streamlined process. So every kiddo who walks into that space, you're kind of like, okay, what's your makeup? And how do we get you across that finish line? Where do you want to live? How do we use these vouchers so that you're not living in Loveland, but commuting and going to school on Collins? Because that's going to really be a challenge when you don't have a vehicle. So looking at all of that. So yes and no is the answer. It's really selective on the requirements of the voucher. Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah.
Are you able to work with the development companies come here? For instance, we read about the that's buying the funeral home space on Mason, and they Holdingers, yes, property, and they were putting in 1-bedroom apartments, lofts, and we were curious about whether they would use your programs.
So in Boulder County has programs, it's called permanent supported housing. So when I talk about Boulder, they have their youth shelters. So they have this continuum. Kiddos who come into their youth shelter and utilize that resource, and then kiddos who need that permanent supported housing. So they actually have their own housing. I believe about 45 apartments to transition kiddos from the shelter space onto permanent supported housing. So yes, is that a possibility? And development in that is a lot of work. Location, space, all of that, it's a little, and so for us, we're probably at least 10, 15 years behind Boulder in being able to build out and support housing. But again, identifying in our community that we as a community need to address the need of our unaccompanied youth and our youth experiencing homelessness versus shipping them down to Boulder and Denver is a good starting, right? And then transitioning on to what does that mean longer term? Sheltering is only healthy for a short period of time. And how do we transition those individuals into more permanent spaces as needed? So love our ideas. Yes, absolutely. If you know a development guru who love to me and just like donate all of it, I would gladly talk to them. So yeah.
topics specifically like young teenagers?
Yep. So the question is around young parents, and traditionally the high school. So I'm actually a really good friend with the teen parent program teacher here in your school district, Melissa Schaefer. And so Melissa has been running that for many, many years actually. And so part of we do interface with young adults who are parents, who are parenting, and how we support. We do there. It's an interesting kind of space to be in because you have an adolescent, right, who is still developmentally in that stage of learning independent living and life skills. Are also parenting, and so those kiddos who are parenting themselves are traditionally go between both our youth program and our community life centers. So they live in those spaces because some of my staff who work with youth, they're not parents themselves. And so it's a little more challenging. I'm not saying it's not possible to work in that space sometimes with a young adult who's parenting. And so they themselves will work with our community life center staff who are traditionally a little bit older, a little bit more seasoned, have their may have children of their own, and so be able to help support some of that developmental needs of that little child. Because our whole goal is that that unit, that family, does not land in the Department of Human Services, right? So how do we give that reference so that we can ensure that they're taken care of? Absolutely, it is breaking the cycle. It's being aware of what does that look like, how do we support, and helping early on. Parenting as a young adult is really challenging. And so I think helping individuals see that, and we have seen a decrease in teenage pregnancy in our community. And so Melissa would easily tell you, we see a decrease in that. And so we don't see it much. We do have a couple staff who were teen parents themselves. So that also is a support. And so when we talk about lived experience, I have staff that have a whole gamut of experiences in different spaces that I think are also equally important to kind of shine the light on the importance. You can still do it. You absolutely can, but it can be a really big challenge too. So you have to have a support system and a process in play. Other questions? Well, thank you all very, very much. I appreciate you guys being able to share your space. As I said earlier, I look forward to continuing to share the successes that your space that sometimes you don't always get the opportunity to know what goes on in this building, maybe day in and day out. And so really cool to hear the academic support in the different areas that your program, your space provides ongoing in your partnership with us. So thank you guys for that. So thank you.
We really want to thank Nicole for being here tonight, and I know that all of us will go back out and talk to other members of our congregation about all the things we learned, because I don't think many people in our congregation really realize all the wonderful work that you're doing. So thank you again. And what we'll do now is we'll take a moment to close in prayer. Next week we have CASA coming, which is the Court Appointed Special Advocacy Program. Some of you know Patty Baker, and she has been a CASA volunteer for a number of years with several youth. And so that's will be our focus next week. Let's close in prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for the information we have learned. Help us to know how to use it to further your will in our world. Help us to be your hands and feet. In Christ's name we pray.
Thank you so much for that. That was just so informative.
Yeah. But it's probably not worked off the PowerPoint.
Well,
Ramble.
no, that's